Ukraine's president says he wants peace without delay and would discuss a neutral status for Ukraine as part of any deal with Russia. Negotiations are due to resume tomorrow in Istanbul, but for now, the war here in Ukraine rages on.
Some of the other leaders have said that if they intervened in the war, if there was a no-fly zone, it could be World War III.
Maybe. But if they don't close the sky, they will be next.
The former owner of Chelsea, Roman Abramovich, and 2 Ukrainian peace negotiators are said to have suffered symptoms of poisoning following a meeting in Kiev.
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. We're live here in Lviv in western Ukraine. Well, with a new round of peace talks about to resume, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said his country could adopt a status of neutrality as part of a settlement to end the war here. But he says it would have to go to a referendum and be guaranteed by third parties. Well, it comes after Russian advances have stalled in recent weeks here. This map shows the areas of Ukraine currently under Russian control. Russian troops still have not been able to encircle the capital, Kyiv. The closest they've advanced there is about 15 miles from the city centre. Humanitarian corridors had been set up to evacuate civilians from some other parts of Ukraine that have been besieged and bombarded. But today Ukraine said it would not open those corridors because of fears Russian forces might attack people who are fleeing, something Moscow denies. Our first report tonight is from Jeremy Bowen in Kyiv and does contain some distressing images.
The Russians attacked an oil storage depot in western Ukraine. The war is settling into a deadly daily grind. Medics live and sleep at the hospitals. There's no time to get home. In one in Kyiv, the patients include a Ukrainian diplomat. Victoria said it was ironic that she was wounded in her own home when she came back from Belarus, Russia's ally. But I won't lie, she said, I'm very scared. Gennadi's home was also hit. The Russians thought they'd be greeted with hugs, he says. But if we don't get weapons to take the offensive, missiles and planes, the war's going to drag on for a long time. President Zelensky hinted at compromise to Russian journalists on Ukrainian neutrality and territory.
I understand. It's impossible to force Russia completely from the Ukrainian territory. It would lead to the Third World War. I understand it, and that is why I'm talking about a compromise.
In Kyiv, a few cafes are open and it's less tense than a month ago. Slava and Katerina were intrigued by what the president had said.
Nobody's saying we should give up the territories, but there should be some compromise or concession.
We hope that Putin is a sane person, but it's a very small hope.
But at the end of the lonely roads out to the frontline towns, the war feels much closer. In Borispil, facing the Russians to the east, people risk a trip to the market. But the mayor shows off his Ukrainian-made assault rifle and says that NATO's only choice is to give them the planes and the tanks they need to beat the Russians.
I think if Putin wins this war, they don't stop. Next will be Poland, maybe Romanian, Bulgarian, and other countries in European Union. I think.
Biden and some of the other leaders have said that if they intervened in the war, if there was a no-fly zone, it could be World War III.
Maybe. But if they don't close the sky, they will be next.
Ukraine's president was right to talk about compromise, but it may never happen. Ceasefire agreements that work generally require either two sides fighting each other to exhaustion, or the weaker side making concessions because it fears defeat, or an outside intervention. None of those conditions applies in Ukraine at the moment. So the most likely option is a continuation of a war of attrition. Jeremy Bowen, BBC News, Kyiv.
Well, in the south of this country, Ukrainian forces have had some success in recent days in pushing back Russian troops, raising doubts about whether the Kremlin will still try to seize control of the whole coastline there. In Odessa, the immediate fear of Russian bombardment has eased, but people there are unsure about whether it's just a temporary lull in the fighting. From there, Andrew Harding sent us this report.
Somewhere out there is the Russian Navy. And on Ukraine's Black Sea coast, no one is letting down their guard. We've had a lot of incoming fire, he says. Rockets, bombs, and the fear of an amphibious landing. And yet, in the nearby port city of Odessa, clubs and restaurants are reopening. Not exactly packed yet, but the mood here appears to be easing.
The city is coming alive. I feel something like this.
Why is that?
I don't know. I think the fear is go away a little bit.
People think that Odessa won't be attacked?
I think yes.
And here's why he may be right. Along the Black Sea coast, Russian hardware and Russian plans lie in ruins. The Kremlin's advance here has stalled or even been pushed back. Which may explain these tense scenes in Kherson, a frontline city occupied by the Russians, having growing trouble controlling it.
When they started using this gas, smoke pellets and stun grenades, so I started running. Since they are using more threatening techniques and tactics, I think they are in panic.
Panic or not, back in Odessa, Ukrainians are still preparing for a Russian attack from land, sea or air.
But what if this war is edging towards some kind of a stalemate? Of course, anything is still possible, but here in the south, Ukrainians increasingly are looking for reasons to be hopeful, maybe even confident.
Down in Odessa's ancient catacombs, echoes from the past. These vast tunnels once helped families shelter from the Nazis.
There's some graffiti here from the 1940s. It reads, "Hitler go, death to fascism."
Now, the past and present seem to mingle in the musty air. And yet, from its catacombs to its clubs, today's Odessa is embracing optimism, as if that alone were a form of defiance against the Kremlin. Andrew Harding, BBC News in southern Ukraine.
Well, as ever, our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucet, joins us now from the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. And Lise, does this latest offer to make Ukraine a neutral state, does that make any difference really to these peace talks, which we gather are going to resume tomorrow in Istanbul?
Sadly, no. President Zelensky has said it before. The significance of it this time was the language, Russian, the audience, Russian journalists, and the timing, as you say, in advance of these peace talks. But we had heard from the international mediators, both the Israelis and the Turkish, that the talks, while they still hadn't made enough progress, were, in their words, more realistic. They said that Ukraine understood it had to abandon its ambition to join NATO. They also said that President Putin was more realistic. He wasn't calling for the end of the Zelensky government. But the biggest issue on the table is that of territory. And there won't be progress at the negotiating table until there's more progress on the territory, as far as President Putin is concerned. He will want at least the Donbass, eastern Ukraine, a corridor connecting Crimea and eastern Ukraine, both areas under his sway, largely. And he may want more. The Ukrainians are saying he wants a North and South Korea idea, the country split in two. But there was a warning from President Zelensky in that interview as well. He said the person elected after me will be younger and less accommodating. And perhaps that is a measure of this generation growing up in President Putin's war.
Yeah, Elise, thank you very much indeed. And in fact, certainly the people I've been talking to here in Western Ukraine don't have very much faith in these peace talks. In fact, they've been telling me they believe this is a war they can eventually win. Even at the moment, the odds seem very much stacked against them.
To events in Ukraine now. And tonight it's been reported that the Chelsea owner, Roman Abramovich, suffered symptoms of suspected poisoning. It happened after he attended peace talks in Ukraine. The Russian billionaire was involved in the negotiations between the two sides. And let's cross to our global security editor, Rohit Khatru, who's in Kyiv. Rohit, this is extraordinary, isn't it? What have you heard? What can you tell us?
Well, Mary, Roman Abramovich is not only a key figure because he's the owner of Chelsea Football Club, because he's an oligarch, a billionaire, but because of his closeness to Vladimir Putin, which has lasted for several decades. And because of that, he's played a key role informally in peace talks between both sides in this conflict. He is a friend of Putin, but he was invited by the Ukrainians to play a role. He held some conversations with the former Chancellor of Germany, for example. Now, it's being reported that he suffered symptoms consistent with poisoning from chemicals, as did several members of the Ukrainian team. Now, we don't know what happened, of course. We don't know whether he was behind the scenes protesting at the Kremlin's course of action. We know that he was sanctioned and suffered from that, but sanctions from the UK only came several days after this alleged poisoning. So the allegation here is that he was not only sanctioned by the West, but he was poisoned by the Kremlin too.
OK, Rohit Khatru in Kyiv. Thank you. Well, meanwhile, face-to-face peace talks between Russia and Ukraine are expected to start in Istanbul tomorrow. But Ukraine insists it's not prepared to make any concessions on territory. And that all came as Russia's invasion appeared to have largely stalled, with Ukrainians fighting back attacks in the industrial Donbas region in the southeast of the country. And in the north, on the outskirts of the capital Kyiv, where Rohit is, there are reports tonight that Ukrainian forces have retaken the city of Irpin. Here's Garrett Vincent with the latest.
The mayor of Irpin has good news, he says. Our community has been liberated. The Russians attacked Irpin, just northwest of Kiev, as they tried to advance on the capital. Now the Ukrainians say they've taken back full control. And after more than a month of fighting, the invading superpower still does not control the sky above this country. And so Russia's defense ministry releases video of its anti-aircraft systems. And its spokesman gives assurances of progress, with news of the Ukrainian jets and drones that they have shot down. On the ground, in Chernihiv, the war came to yet another civilian area over the weekend. The couple who own this car think it stopped a rocket from hitting their flat. We needed a new one anyway, she jokes. Her neighbour is less amused. Putin and Russia are absolute trash, she swears. Moscow says it's now concentrating its assault in the east of the country, the Donbas, an area which includes the now devastated port city of Mariupol. Russia has had effective control over much of this territory since its invasion of 2014, and the fighting here has been bitter. But clearly desperate to stop the suffering of civilians, Ukraine's president appears ready to negotiate over this part of his country. I understand it's impossible to make Russia give up this territory completely, said Mr. Zelensky. Let's try to resolve the question of the Donbass. And for the first time today, a sign of a positive response from Moscow. A meeting between Zelensky and Vladimir Putin is needed, said Russia's foreign minister, as soon as clarity is reached on vital issues. A Russian negotiating team landed in Turkey this afternoon for talks with their Ukrainian counterparts. There may be more for them to discuss now. And for those people still trapped in cities under siege, a ceasefire can't come quickly enough. Garrett Vincent, ITV News, Western Ukraine.